In times when governments around the world are creating more problems for the citizens than solving them, citizens are actually taking over themselves. I'm sitting here in the center of London with my good friend Mikkel Iversen, who a few years back started Under One Sky, a charity for the homeless. And Mikkel, that's one thing is that a lot of people are having those thoughts about, in spirit, especially in the spiritual communion, to do things like that. But there's a hell of a lot way from having the thought to doing it. How did it start for you? I mean, I think it's amazing what you have achieved. Mm-hmm. So I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the goings.
It's been a long journey. It's actually been a 20-year journey. And I've only realized that actually later on in life, but Under One Sky started really back in 2003. I just started my career here in London and was fortunate enough to be made redundant twice in 3 years. I hit the dot-com bubble, and then I went into an industry that collapsed. And at the same time, I had a severe medical issue where I had to roll out of bed every morning and teach myself how to walk. And so that was a dark time. And what happened during that period was I discovered meditation. So I started meditating, and I also, through that sort of in that same phase, actually managed to cure myself through mind. And so my old world kind of started collapsing and a new world started emerging. And what happened in that process soon after all these things started to unravel was I had a voice come to me saying, your passion is people. And at the time I understood the words, but clearly I was on a very different path. I actually thought I wanted to be an investment banker. But what I did was just slowly try to honor that path. And whenever I sort of had a pull towards something to go in that direction, instead of just pushing it away, saying, oh, this is just a thought, and I'll let it go. And so what happened in that process was I started being pulled towards people who needed help. All kinds of life stories and different types of help that was needed. And so with that, it almost sort of developed a bit of a sixth sense where I could sometimes go into a place and very quickly I had a sense that person over there, I needed to speak to that person. Clearly there are tons of people in this world who need help. So it wasn't like every person who needs help I had to go to. So it was specific people. And during that process, which lasted about 8 years, back in probably 2010-11, I bumped into a man who was homeless. He was a refugee. He'd been refused asylum here in the UK. But he was a very interesting man, and I spoke to him one evening when I was out having a good time, actually. And so I asked him if we should have lunch the next day. And so we had lunch the next day, and that was the first real step into the journey of working with someone who was on the street. And I supported him for about 12 months.
How did you own money? And
it does end up also costing money, but it was actually more time. And I think what people might not realize when you step into a situation like that is probably more the emotional side, because you get into situations that you're completely unfamiliar with. And I didn't know anything about the system or what it meant to be homeless and so on. So everything was new. So for me, that was where the sort of the training wheels within the homelessness field started to roll for me. And so I helped him for a year and got him to a place that was a good moment for us to kind of say, okay, our journey is finished for now. And with him it is for now, because we're now actually been reunited. And then I supported another man shortly after that for a year. Again, completely different story, a very tricky character, because of the life that he lived, and actually not so much the life that he lived, but what he'd been exposed to as a child. And so those two experiences really, they were the training wheels for me. And in that period of time, I had also set up a film production company to make films that inspire positive social change. And we were working on scripts, and that can take a long, long time. And so I just said to my business partner, why don't we go out this Christmas and just spend time with the people in the streets and give them some Christmas presents? And that's how it began. So the first time we went out was just one evening. A few of our friends came. No expectations, just do it purely out of joy and out of the fact of what we wanted to do. And what happened then was, I mean, I was blown away by the stories that you were told on the streets, because it's when you start talking to people that you understand why they're there. And I shared some of those stories online, and then my friends came to me online and said, oh, you have to do this next year. I want to take part next year. And so Under One Sky, as the organization is called, really was created out of a bit of an accident, almost, of just me saying, let's do this for one evening. So that's how it started. So actually we've been going since 2012, but almost like what I call a hobby organization. We were doing pop-up events during the winter. It was my friends, it was sort of friends, family, friends of friends. And we just slowly grew, and there was absolutely no expectation, no plans. Whatever happens, happens. The ethos has always been one of, let's just do this out of joy. And I think that's a key thing to your question is, if something is tugging in you, just try stuff. I mean, that's what life is for. Life is for experimentation. The only thing that's holding you back is your ego, because you might have expectations. Talk to people. There's always a great blessing in not knowing anything about anything, because you just step in and you ask for help. Is when you start thinking that you know something about something that you start putting your barriers up, because it's like, oh, I don't want to ask for help because I don't want to look stupid. So it was purely out of joy, and because of course, with Under One Sky and how it got going, I understood the past of those past 10 years and what it had meant. The way it grew was also really, I would say, all kind of guided by the cosmos. You know, new people would come in or opportunities would come in, and you'd just roll with it. No kind of sitting down and overanalyzing anything. And then what happened when the pandemic hit was really a moment where we had a situation of what you're referring to, because we hadn't planned to do anything during the pandemic, because we're a small organization, ill-equipped, no money, no facilities, nothing. But what we did was we went out on the streets just to have a look at what was going on.
You were present.
Yeah, we went out there just to actually, it was a week before lockdown here in the UK. And it was one of the other people who've been involved for a long time, Ben, who said she would just take a walk through town and see what's happening. And it was quite shocking what was happening, actually, because we walked through our sort of normal hotspot areas, and there were two key observations. One was we met people who hadn't had food for up to a week. And the reason was that the charities who are normally on the streets had also stayed at home. Everyone was terrified of, what the virus was. And we were like having gloves and hats, and we looked like three people who were going to rob a bank. Quite kind of pointless at that time, because the banks were shut. So that was one thing, and that just showed to us, as we knew already, that actually so much of society runs on what I call a charity economy. You don't realize it before you step into the issues and you see how it really works. But people on the streets know that they need to be in this street corner on a Monday, and there on a Tuesday afternoon, and there on a Friday, and that had gone. The other thing that we experienced during that little walk through town was 50% of the people we met had become homeless that week. So those were people who were working in these 0-hour contracts, building sites, hospitality, domestic sort of jobs, cleaning jobs, And it's when something like this happened that actually it makes transparent how ill the system is. Because you met people who have been told, well, you can't sofa surf at my place anymore because I don't want anyone else in my home because of the fear of infection and so on and so forth. And so in that moment we said, we don't know how to do this because we don't have anything, but we're going to be out here until society opens up again. And it was just that commitment where it's like you make that commitment and there's no stepping back from it. And it's quite difficult sometimes to replay that in our minds of how severe it was. But I mean, we were talking about this was life or death for some people, right? And so you never think that you're going to be in that situation in probably what I think is the capital of the world, a big wealthy city, but suddenly we had that situation.
Yeah. But that was in the pandemic was that time when you really realized how bad the situation was, and the need for expanding the thing, or it came from that. It needed to expand.
It totally came from that. So when we made the commitment of saying, yes, we will be out here until society opens again, that's when we then had to say, well, how do we get funding? How do we get logistics and everything else? And actually, kind of miraculously, the day after we did that walk, I had a meeting with a friend of mine who was also involved with another homeless charity. And so we actually started out with them. And they then decided not to be part of it in the longer run, but at least that kind of shifted things into motion, because they had a building so we could have some stock and start organizing, and they had a van, and so all the practical stuff.
But there was no help whatsoever from the government or for official sides.
Not to us. I mean, what the government put a scheme into place called Everyone In, that was about getting people who were on the streets into hotels. And that was successful, admirable scheme, but it didn't mean that everyone went in. And one of the issues, and I guess one of the weaknesses that it showed in the system, was they could try to get people in who they knew were homeless, but you just had this huge swathe of people landing on the streets who the system didn't know were homeless.
And they did not know what to do because they were beginners in this new...
They were beginners at a time when none of the facilities were there. So it was like, it must have been terrifying for these people. And there's some really sad stories. So for example, on that first walk, we met an Italian lady who she'd just become homeless. Our team saw her week in and week out, a day in and day out, and she was too proud to admit, almost to her own mind, that she was in this situation. So she'd sit at the bus stop all day pretending to be on her mobile phone. And as the weeks wore on, we just saw her getting into a worse and worse and worse state. And that's actually how, just in terms of how things unfolded on the streets, in the beginning it was physical stuff like, food. One thing that to this day I don't understand why it wasn't provided were access to toilets, showers, running water.
That was the real problem, because they shut everything down.
Everything was shut. There were very few places where you could go to the toilet, and I can't help but compare it a bit to if people are in prison, because even the worst prisoner gets access to water and food and a place to go to the toilet, and that could easily have been provided for. I personally think that they should actually have the military come in and set up a small infrastructure. That didn't happen.
But what about now? It seems to me that when I talk to you about it, not that we talk so much about it, but that I get the feeling that it has grown really big from that during the pandemic. Having restaurants working for you and different other companies that is... And now I believe you are really deemed a charity, a real charity.
Yes.
Meaning that, what does that mean for the...
So I think the phrase "the proof is in the pudding." I mean, we did a lot of that.
Yeah.
We made a lot of pudding, right? Because we were out every day, and slowly the media caught wind of it. And our breakthrough moment was having a journalist from The Guardian out with us.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And she wanted to cover a story about the people within the hospitality sector who'd become homeless overnight. And when that came out, the dam burst, which was amazing for us, but also created a bit of an issue because we weren't set up. Like we didn't have
to handle all these things. No, I see.
So it was very challenging. But then, ironically, and obviously after that, suddenly we had loads of media, international, national, etc. And with that, a lot of businesses came in and said, how can we help? And so that's when we started building these relationships. And of course, as time has worn on and we keep doing what we're doing. And I think that's the other thing, is the consistency of it. Like, we weren't a COVID emergency initiative that jump-started things. Yeah. But the problem hasn't gone away.
No.
And so we're not going away.
So what I feel, and the reason why I wanted to do this, is also there must be a consistency in getting people aware that this is something that is going on every day. And there are people here, for example in London and so many other places, that work for this issue. And the problem is still here. So the last question I would like to ask you is, how can we support you and support this movement, for example? I think that is very essential for people to know, because tomorrow that's another thing, and then there's another thing, and people tend to forget. We need to remember these things, and also how can we support this? So please.
There are there's a myriad of ways. I think one thing that's really important when we speak about the challenge of homelessness is to actually understand some of the root causes. And almost a third of people in the street say that the main reason or the reason they're on the street is because of the trauma they had to go through as children. And you often hear people say, well, these people end up on the streets because they made the wrong decisions. But when you're a child and your mother's being beaten up, you don't make that decision. You don't make that decision if you're subject to sexual abuse. So one of the things that I'd really love people to do when they walk past someone on the street is to see that child. And so there's a number of layers that we can work at, and actually that's how we've structured how we work at Under One Sky. So one level is about changing the narrative around homelessness, so that we start looking at the human side of it, understanding what's the background, but also understanding what's the human experience of being homeless. Because the social isolation that these people experience is harmful in any way, every way, physically, mentally, spiritually. It's super harmful. And so just seeing these people, as human beings, and even if it's the smallest gesture. So we had one of our homeless friends, as we call them, he did a count for 2 days, and he counted how many times do someone recognize that I'm there asking for help. And it was about 1 in 100. Now you imagine if you are sitting and you're needing a job and you write 100 applications, and one of them comes back and says, "Thank you, we've received your letter." That's what we're talking about, and how devastating that is, right? So there's that level about actually changing how we look at these human beings who are unfortunately in this situation. Then the other pillar that we have is about building community. So that's about volunteering for private people, companies asking themselves, how can we be of support? So, and most company can be in some way, shape or form. It can be either, volunteering through the company, it can be financial support, it can also be just supporting with their own staff. And we're starting to see more and more companies come in like that. where actually they're saying, tell us how you can use us. Do we have an accountant you can use, or do we sell products that you can use? How can we do this? So, and then the third level that we're working at is what we call changing lives. And that's about really going deep into the personal relationships with the people on the streets to build the trust and connection so they can have the confidence in telling us what they've gone through, but also where they're stuck. Because when we understand where they're stuck, we can start to come up with solutions. And we've done that in many occasions. The other side of this changing lives for us is actually changing the lives of those who volunteer. And it is life-changing. And it's incredible how powerful it is to do these, what looks on the surface like simple engagements, but it goes straight down to the roots on both sides. And so it's not an act of service.
No.
It's an act of exchange. Because we cannot speak to another human being or interact without exchanging. And so with that, where I also feel that we're having an added benefit is that when you start breaking that open in people's hearts, you're going to be a better parent, you're going to be a better partner, you're going to be a better colleague, you're going to be a better friend. And so when we speak about trying to change society through people power, I think often what we think is demonstrations and placards and so on, which is also very important. But there's also a much deeper level or different level of trying to change society through people power. And that's by connecting humanity. And that's by starting to have shared purpose, shared narrative, feeling that the person who is sitting next to you is actually your companion in some kind of bigger thing that we're trying to achieve in society. And that's when everything starts marrying up. So in terms of how people can support our mission, learn more about homelessness, read about it. It's homelessness and trauma goes hand in hand, and both why people end up on the streets, but also the experience of being on the streets. When you encounter someone who's homeless, don't feel obliged to always have them stand and have a conversation, but just recognize that person. Whether it's just like winking to someone or say have a good day. And of course, if people work in companies, think about how the companies can come in and help wherever they are. Financial support for us is always like that's what it runs on.
I mean, I think for example, when you go on the street, a lot of people are not carrying any cash, so they're standing with a problem here, and most people are in a hurry, so they don't care to go to the cash and draw some money out and go back and give it, So it become maybe an embarrassment for them, and so they look the other way. That's most easy. So I think a lot of people would actually like to help. So a lot of people would be much more able to do economical, because they haven't got time themselves, So where can they? Will you have any?
So for we have a rolling crowdfunding campaign that we've had that's been going for quite a while.
Is there a bank account or something?
Also, I mean, but if people contact us directly, then we also have like direct bank transfers. So we're working, because we're such a young organization in a way in terms of setting up, we're still working on getting that set up on our website and so on. But there's our crowdfunding campaign is the easiest place for people to go.
So we will provide that here in this video before we end.
There's one thing just to what you said that I think is actually a really crucial thing just to mention, and that is I totally agree with you, this thing about the embarrassment of not having something to give. And I think when we think like that, we have to ask ourselves, if we don't feel that we have something to provide, if we're not giving something materially, what do we think of our own presence and our own time? How much value do we put on that?
Exactly.
Because the matter of the fact is, if you go out there and you ask most people on the streets, would you rather have a sandwich and I leave now, or a bit of a chat?
Exactly.
Most people want to chat.
But I think I'm just what I experience when I'm walking, you know, that I think a lot of people there are going from A to B and they're in a hurry.
Yeah.
So everything is about money in a way, but they don't carry money. So it's really, people are caught up in a, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a. So there's loads of stuff that people can do on their own, just being present, and of course, support an organization that actually does the work every day and try to do it in the right way.
Mikkel, thank you.
Thank
my
you.
good friend. Here's a guy who walked the talk.